Emma Martinez stood at the front steps of Lincoln High School on a bright Monday morning in September. The red brick building looked bigger than she remembered from the school tour last spring. Students walked past her in groups, laughing and talking loudly about their summer vacations. Emma pulled her backpack straps tighter and took a deep breath. She was 16 years old and starting her third year at Lincoln High. Emma had always been a quiet girl who loved reading books more than talking to people. Her thick brown hair fell over her shoulders and she often hid behind it when she felt nervous. Today was one of those days. The hallways were full of noise and excitement. Students called out to friends they had not seen all summer. Locker doors slammed shut. Teachers stood by their classroom doors with bright smiles welcoming everyone back. Emma walked slowly through the crowd, checking her schedule again. English class was first period in room 204. Emma had always done well in school. Her grades were mostly A's and B's. She especially loved English class because she enjoyed writing stories and reading novels. Books were like friends to her. They never judged her for being quiet or made her feel bad for preferring to listen rather than talk. Room 204 was on the second floor. Emma climbed the stairs and found the classroom easily. The door was open, and she could see students already sitting at desks. She walked in and looked around for an empty seat. Most students were talking with each other, but Emma found a desk near the window in the third row and sat down quietly. The teacher was not in the room yet. Emma took out her notebook and a pen from her backpack. She liked to be ready for class to start. Other students continued chatting about their summer trips, new clothes, and weekend plans. Emma listened but did not join in. She was used to being on the outside of these conversations. At exactly 8 o'clock, the teacher walked into the room. She was a tall woman with gray hair pulled back in a tight bun. Her clothes were dark and neat, and she carried herself like someone who was very serious about her job. She set her bag on the desk at the front of the room and turned to face the class. "Good morning, class," she said in a clear, strong voice. "I am Mrs. Blackwood. I will be your English teacher this year." The room became quiet right away. Mrs. Blackwood had the kind of voice that made people listen. Emma sat up straighter in her chair. "I have been teaching English at this school for 22 years, Mrs. Blackwood continued. "I have high expectations for all of my students. I expect you to work hard, think deeply, and take your education seriously." She walked slowly around the room as she spoke, looking at each student. When her eyes met Emma's, Emma felt a strange chill. Mrs. Blackwood's gaze seemed cold and unfriendly. "This year, we will read some of the greatest works of literature ever written," Mrs. Blackwood said. "We will write essays that require real thought and effort. I do not accept lazy work or excuses. If you are not prepared to challenge yourself, you should not be in my class." Emma felt excited about the reading list. She loved discovering new books and authors. Maybe this would be a good year for English class after all. Mrs. Blackwood handed out the syllabus and reading list. Emma looked at the titles with interest. There were classic novels she had heard about but never read, along with poetry and short stories. "For homework tonight," Mrs. Blackwood announced, "I want each of you to write a one-page essay about your summer reading. Tell me what book you read and what you learned from it. This will help me understand your current writing abilities." Emma smiled to herself. She had read 6 books over the summer. Writing about them would be easy and fun. The next day, Emma arrived at English class with her essay carefully written and checked for spelling mistakes. She was proud of her work. She had written about a novel called To Kill a Mockingbird and how it taught her about courage and standing up for what is right. Mrs. Blackwood collected the essays from each student. "I will read these tonight and return them tomorrow with my comments," she said. "This will give me a good idea of where each of you stands as a writer." Emma felt confident about her essay. Writing had always been her strongest subject. The following day, Mrs. Blackwood returned the essays. She called each student's name and handed back their paper. When she reached Emma's name, she paused and looked directly at her. "Miss Martinez," Mrs. Blackwood said in a voice that carried across the whole room. "Please stand up." Emma felt confused but stood up slowly. She noticed that other students were turning to look at her. Her face began to feel warm. "Class, I want to use Miss Martinez's essay as an example," Mrs. Blackwood continued. "This essay shows exactly what I do not want to see in my classroom." Emma's heart started beating faster. She felt like all the air had left the room. Mrs. Blackwood held up Emma's essay and began to read parts of it out loud. But instead of reading it normally, She changed her voice to make it sound silly and childish. Some students in the class began to giggle. "The writing is pedestrian at best," Mrs. Blackwood said, using a word Emma did not know. "It lacks any real insight or original thinking. Miss Martinez has simply repeated what thousands of other students have written about this book. There is nothing here that shows real understanding or intelligence." Emma felt her face burning with shame. She wanted to disappear or run out of the room. Instead, she stood frozen by her desk while 30 other students stared at her. "Furthermore," Mrs. Blackwood continued, "the sentence structure is basic and boring. The vocabulary is limited. This is the kind of writing I would expect from a much younger student, not someone who claims to love reading." Emma had never felt so embarrassed in her entire life. Her essay, which she had been so proud of, was being torn apart in front of everyone. She felt tears starting to form in her eyes but tried hard not to cry. "You may sit down now, Miss Martinez," Mrs. Blackwood said finally. "I hope this serves as a lesson to everyone about the level of work I expect in this class." Emma sat down quickly and stared at her desk for the rest of the period. She could not focus on anything Mrs. Blackwood said after that. All she could think about was how stupid she must have sounded, and how the other students were probably still thinking about her terrible essay. When the bell rang, Emma packed her things as quickly as possible and hurried out of the room. She did not look at any of her classmates. She just wanted to get away and forget that the whole thing had ever happened. But as she walked to her next class, Emma could not shake the feeling that something was very wrong. Other teachers had always praised her writing. Her English teacher last year had told her she had real talent. So why did Mrs. Blackwood think her work was so bad? Emma spent the rest of the day feeling confused and hurt. She began to wonder if maybe she was not as good at writing as she had thought. Maybe Mrs. Blackwood was right, and she really was just an average student who had been fooling herself all along. That evening, Emma sat at her desk at home and stared at the essay Mrs. Blackwood had returned to her. The paper was covered in red ink with harsh comments written in the margins. Words like boring, obvious, and lacks depth were scattered across every paragraph. Emma read through the comments several times, trying to understand what she had done wrong. But the more she read, the more confused she became. The criticism seemed so harsh compared to what she had written. She began to doubt everything she thought she knew about her own abilities. As she got ready for bed that night, Emma felt a heavy feeling in her chest. Tomorrow she would have to face Mrs. Blackwood again. She wondered if the teacher would embarrass her in front of the class once more. The thought made her stomach feel sick. Emma had always looked forward to English class, but now she dreaded it. She did not know that this was only the beginning of something much worse. Mrs. Blackwood had chosen her target, and Emma's quiet, trusting nature made her the perfect victim for what was to come. The next few weeks passed like a dark cloud hanging over Emma's head. Every day in English class brought new moments of embarrassment and confusion. Mrs. Blackwood seemed to have decided that Emma was her favorite target for criticism. It started small at first. When Emma raised her hand to answer a question about the novel they were reading, Mrs. Blackwood would cut her off mid-sentence. "That is not correct." "Miss Martinez," she would say, even when Emma's answer was right. "Perhaps you should read more carefully before attempting to contribute to our discussion." Emma noticed that when other students gave similar answers, Mrs. Blackwood praised them or at least accepted their responses without criticism. But when Emma spoke, there was always something wrong with what she said. During the second week of school, Mrs. Blackwood assigned the class to write a short story. Emma spent hours working on hers at home. She wrote about a girl who found a magical garden behind her house. The story had interesting characters and a clear beginning, middle, and end. Emma checked her spelling and grammar twice before turning it in. When Mrs. Blackwood returned the stories, Emma saw a large C written in red ink at the top of her paper. Below it, Mrs. Blackwood had written, "Lacks imagination. Plot is predictable and characters are one-dimensional." Emma looked around at her classmates as they got their papers back. She heard several students talking excitedly about their grades. Jake, who sat 2 seats over, got a B+ on a story about playing football. Sarah, who sat in front of Emma, received an A for her story about going to the mall with friends. Emma read their stories when they passed them around. Her story was much more creative and interesting than theirs, but somehow she had received the worst grade. She felt confused and hurt, but she was too shy to question the teacher about it. The pattern continued in different ways. When Mrs. Blackwood asked students to read paragraphs aloud from their textbooks, she always seemed to choose Emma for the most difficult passages. Then she would interrupt Emma while she was reading. "Slower, Miss Martinez. Your reading sounds rushed and careless," Mrs. Blackwood would say. "Start over, and this time, try to read with some understanding of what the words actually mean." Emma's face would turn red as she started the paragraph again. She was actually a very good reader, but Mrs. Blackwood's constant interruptions made her nervous and caused her to stumble over words she normally read easily. Other students began to notice what was happening. During lunch one day, Emma sat alone at her usual table in the corner of the cafeteria. She overheard two girls from her English class talking at the next table. "Did you see how mean Mrs. Blackwood was to Emma again today?" one of them said. "Yeah, it's getting weird," the other replied. "Emma's actually pretty smart, but Mrs. Blackwood acts like she can't do anything right." "I'm just glad it's not me," the first girl said. "I would probably cry if she talked to me like that every day." Emma felt both relieved and sad to hear this. At least she was not imagining things. Other people could see that Mrs. Blackwood was treating her unfairly, but knowing that her classmates noticed only made her feel more embarrassed about the situation. In the third week of school, Mrs. Blackwood assigned a research project about famous American authors. Students had to choose an author, research their life and work, and give a 10-minute presentation to the class. Emma chose Emily Dickinson because she loved poetry and found Dickinson's life story fascinating. She spent hours at the library reading books and articles about the poet. She made detailed notes and created an outline for her presentation. She even found some of Dickinson's poems that she wanted to read aloud to the class. When Emma's turn came to present, she stood at the front of the classroom feeling nervous but prepared. She began by telling the class about Emily Dickinson's childhood and how she became interested in writing poetry. "Miss Martinez," Mrs. Blackwood interrupted after only 2 minutes. "Your voice is too quiet. No one can hear you properly." Emma spoke louder and continued her presentation. She talked about how Dickinson wrote hundreds of poems but only published a few during her lifetime. "Miss Martinez," Mrs. Blackwood interrupted again. "You are reading directly from your notes. A good presentation should sound natural, not like you are reading from a script." Emma tried to look up from her notes more often and speak in her own words, but every time she found her rhythm, Mrs. Blackwood would interrupt with another criticism. "Stand up straighter. Make eye contact with your audience. Speak with more enthusiasm." By the time Emma finished her presentation, she felt completely defeated. She had worked harder on this project than anyone else in the class, but Mrs. Blackwood had made it seem like everything she did was wrong. When Emma received her grade the next day, she saw a D+ at the top of her research paper. Mrs. Blackwood had written, "Presentation lacked confidence and engagement. Research was superficial. Student needs to work on public speaking skills." Emma watched as other students presented their projects over the following days. She noticed that Mrs. Blackwood never interrupted them the way she had interrupted Emma. Even when students spoke quietly or read directly from their notes, Mrs. Blackwood either said nothing or offered gentle suggestions rather than harsh criticism. Tom gave a presentation about Mark Twain that was much shorter and less detailed than Emma's, but he received a B. Lisa forgot several important facts about her author and had to look them up during her presentation. But she got a B+ anyway. Emma began to feel like she was going crazy. She could not understand why Mrs. Blackwood disliked her so much or what she was doing wrong. She started to question her own abilities and wonder if maybe she really was as bad a student as Mrs. Blackwood seemed to think. The worst part was that Emma had always been confident about her schoolwork. English had been her favorite subject since elementary school. She loved writing stories and reading books. But now every assignment felt like a test she was destined to fail, no matter how hard she tried. Emma's grades in other classes began to suffer too. She found it hard to concentrate in math and science, because she was always thinking about what would happen in English class. She worried about what Mrs. Blackwood would criticize next and how she could avoid being embarrassed in front of her classmates again. At home, Emma's parents noticed that she seemed quieter than usual. Her mother asked if everything was okay at school, but Emma just said she was fine. She felt too ashamed to tell her parents about what was happening. Part of her believed that if she was a better student, Mrs. Blackwood would treat her differently. Emma started spending more time alone in her room, trying to figure out what she was doing wrong. She read her English assignments over and over, looking for mistakes or ways to improve. But no matter how much effort she put into her work, Mrs. Blackwood always found something to criticize. One evening, Emma sat at her desk working on an essay about the themes in Romeo and Juliet. She had read the play twice and taken careful notes about the different themes Shakespeare explored. She wrote about love, fate, family conflict, and the consequences of hatred. As she wrote, Emma tried to think about what Mrs. Blackwood would want to see. She used more complex vocabulary words and tried to make her sentences longer and more sophisticated. She spent 3 hours on the essay, rewriting several paragraphs to make them sound more academic. But even as she worked, Emma felt a growing sense of dread. She knew that no matter how good her essay was, Mrs. Blackwood would find something wrong with it. The teacher had never given Emma anything higher than a C, and her comments were always harsh and discouraging. Emma finished the essay late that night and read it over one more time. She thought it was some of her best writing, but she felt no excitement or pride in her work. Instead, she felt anxious and worried about how Mrs. Blackwood would tear it apart in front of the class. As Emma got ready for bed, she looked at herself in the mirror. She noticed that she looked tired and sad. The confident, book-loving girl who had started the school year just a few weeks ago seemed to be disappearing. In her place was someone who doubted everything about herself and dreaded going to English class each day. Emma did not know that. Mrs. Blackwood's treatment of her was not about her abilities or her work at all. She did not understand that she had become the victim of something much darker and more personal. She only knew that school, which had always been a place where she felt successful and happy, now felt like a place where she could never do anything right. The worst part was that Emma was starting to believe that maybe Mrs. Blackwood was right about her. Maybe she really was not as smart or talented as she had thought. Maybe her previous teachers had just been too easy on her, and now she was finally learning the truth about her abilities. This thought scared Emma more than anything else. If she was not good at school, what was she good at? Her whole identity was built around being a quiet, studious girl who loved learning. If that was not true anymore, who was she supposed to be? Emma fell asleep that night with these troubling questions spinning around in her mind. She had no way of knowing that things were about to get much worse before they got better. By October, Emma's world had become much smaller and darker. The constant criticism from Mrs. Blackwood was affecting every part of her life. She no longer felt confident in any of her classes, even though her other teachers had not changed the way they treated her. In math class, Emma used to raise her hand to answer questions. She had always been good with numbers and enjoyed solving problems. But now, when Mr. Peterson asked the class to solve an equation, Emma kept her hand down even when she knew the answer. She was afraid that if she spoke up and was wrong, she would feel the same shame she felt every day in English class. During science class, Mrs. Chen assigned lab partners for an experiment about plant growth. Emma was paired with Jessica, a friendly girl who had tried to talk to her a few times before. But Emma felt too tired and sad to be a good partner. She let Jessica do most of the work while she just wrote down the results they observed. "Are you okay?" Jessica asked as they cleaned up their lab station. "You seem really quiet lately." Emma forced a small smile. "I'm fine," she said. Just tired, but Emma was not fine. She was beginning to feel like a failure at everything. The voice in her head that used to encourage her to try new things and work hard had been replaced by Mrs. Blackwood's critical voice. Every time Emma tried to do something, she heard the teacher saying that her work was pedestrian, or lacking insight, or not good enough. Emma's few friends began to notice the change in her behavior. At lunch, she used to sit with two girls named Amy and Rachel. They would talk about books they were reading or movies they wanted to see. Emma did not talk much, but she enjoyed listening to their conversations and sometimes shared her own thoughts. Now Emma sat quietly through lunch, picking at her food and barely responding when Amy or Rachel spoke to her. She felt like she had nothing interesting to say. If Mrs. Blackwood thought her ideas were boring and obvious, maybe they really were. "Emma, did you see that new movie that came out last weekend?" Amy asked one day. "No," Emma said quietly, not looking up from her sandwich. "We should all go see it together this Friday," Rachel suggested. "It's supposed to be really good." Emma shook her head. "I can't, I have too much homework." This was not really true. Emma did have homework, but she used to be able to finish it quickly and still have time for other activities. Now she spent hours on each assignment, reading and rewriting everything multiple times because she was so afraid of making mistakes. Amy and Rachel exchanged worried looks. They had noticed that Emma seemed different lately, but they did not know what was wrong. Emma had always been quiet, but now she seemed sad and distant. At home, Emma's parents were also starting to worry. Her mother, Maria, noticed that Emma was spending much more time alone in her room. She used to come downstairs after finishing her homework to watch television with the family or help with dinner. Now she stayed upstairs until it was time to eat, and even then she barely spoke during meals. "How was school today, mija?" Maria asked one evening as the family sat around the dinner table. "Fine," Emma said, not looking up from her plate. "What did you learn in your classes?" Her father, Carlos, asked. Emma shrugged. "Nothing special." Her parents looked at each other with concern. Emma used to love talking about her classes, especially English. She would tell them about the books she was reading and the stories she was writing. Now she acted like school was something to be endured rather than enjoyed. "Is everything okay at school?" Maria asked gently. "You seem upset about something." Emma felt a tightness in her throat. She wanted to tell her parents about Mrs. Blackwood and how the teacher made her feel stupid and worthless every day, but she was too ashamed. If her own English teacher thought she was a bad student, what would her parents think? They had always been proud of her good grades and her love of reading. She did not want to disappoint them by admitting that she was not as smart as they thought. "I'm just tired," Emma said. "School is harder this year." Carlos nodded. "Junior year is when things get more challenging. You're taking harder classes now, but you've always been a good student, Emma. I'm sure you'll do fine." Emma felt even worse after hearing this. Her father still believed she was a good student, but Mrs. Blackwood was showing her every day that this was not true. Emma felt like she was living a lie, pretending to be smart when she was really just average or below average. That night, Emma sat at her desk trying to write an essay for Mrs. Blackwood's class. The assignment was to analyze the symbolism in a short story they had read. Emma had read the story 3 times, but she felt confused about what the symbols were supposed to mean. She started writing several different paragraphs, but deleted each one after a few sentences. Nothing she wrote sounded smart or insightful. She could imagine Mrs. Blackwood reading her essay and shaking her head with disappointment. She could hear the teacher's voice saying that Emma's analysis was superficial and showed no real understanding of literature. Emma worked on the essay for 4 hours, but by the time she went to bed, she had only written half a page. She felt frustrated and exhausted. Her head hurt from staring at the computer screen, and her eyes were sore from holding back tears. The next morning, Emma woke up feeling sick to her stomach. She did not want to go to school, but she knew she had to. She finished her essay quickly, writing whatever came to mind just to have something to turn in. She knew it was not good work, but she felt too defeated to try anymore. In English class, Mrs. Blackwood collected the essays and announced that she would return them the next day. Emma spent the rest of the class period worrying about what the teacher would say about her work. "Today we're going to discuss the themes in our current novel," Mrs. Blackwood said. "I want to hear your thoughts about what the author is trying to say about human nature." Several students raised their hands to share their ideas. Emma kept her hands folded on her desk. She used to love these kinds of discussions, but now she was too afraid to participate. What if her ideas were wrong? What if Mrs. Blackwood embarrassed her in front of the class again? "Miss Martinez," Mrs. Blackwood said suddenly, "you haven't contributed to our discussion yet. What do you think about the main character's actions in Chapter 5? Emma's heart started beating faster. All eyes in the classroom turned to look at her. She felt her face getting hot and her palms becoming sweaty. I think..." Emma started, but her voice came out as barely a whisper. "Speak up, Miss Martinez," Mrs. Blackwood said impatiently. "The rest of us cannot hear you." Emma tried to speak louder, but her throat felt tight. "I think the character made some bad choices," she managed to say. Mrs. Blackwood looked disappointed. "That is a very vague response, Miss Martinez. Can you be more specific? What choices did the character make that you consider bad? And why do you think the author wrote the character this way?" Emma felt panic rising in her chest. She had read the chapter, but under the pressure of Mrs. Blackwood's questioning, she could not think clearly. Her mind went blank. I don't know," Emma whispered. Mrs. Blackwood sighed loudly. This is exactly why it's important to read actively and think critically about what you're reading, Miss Martinez. Simply reading the words on the page is not enough. You need to engage with the text and ask yourself deeper questions. Emma felt her eyes filling with tears. She blinked hard and stared down at her desk, hoping no one would notice. She heard some students shifting uncomfortably in their seats, but no one said anything to defend her. For the rest of the class period, Emma did not look up from her desk. She felt humiliated and stupid. She began to think that maybe she really was not capable of understanding literature the way other students could. Maybe Mrs. Blackwood was right about her. When the bell rang, Emma gathered her things quickly and hurried out of the classroom. She walked to her locker with her head down, trying to avoid making eye contact with anyone. She felt like everyone was looking at her and thinking about how she had embarrassed herself in English class. That afternoon, Emma sat in her other classes but found it hard to concentrate. Her mind kept replaying what had happened in English class. She thought about Mrs. Blackwood's disappointed expression and the way her voice sounded when she criticized Emma's answer. By the time Emma got home from school, she felt completely drained. She went straight to her room and lay down on her bed without even taking off her backpack. She stared at the ceiling and wondered how everything had gone so wrong. Just a few months ago, Emma had been excited about starting junior year. She had looked forward to reading new books and writing interesting essays. She had felt confident about her abilities and proud of her academic achievements. Now she felt like a failure. She doubted everything about herself, from her intelligence to her worth as a person. She wondered if she had been fooling herself all these years about being a good student. Maybe her elementary and middle school teachers had just been nice to her because they felt sorry for her. Emma rolled over and looked at the stack of books on her nightstand. She used to read for pleasure every evening before bed. Reading had always been her escape and her joy. But now, even looking at books reminded her of English class and Mrs. Blackwood's criticism. Emma closed her eyes and tried to imagine what it would be like to feel confident and happy again. November brought gray skies and cold winds to Lincoln High School, and Emma's mood matched the dreary weather. She had been enduring Mrs. Blackwood's constant criticism for almost 3 months now, and it was taking a serious toll on her mental health. Emma had lost weight because she often felt too nervous to eat lunch. She had dark circles under her eyes from staying up late, worrying about homework, and then not being able to sleep. Mrs. Blackwood's treatment of Emma had become even more cruel and personal. It was as if the teacher had decided that Emma was her special project, someone who needed to be broken down completely before she could be built back up. But there was no building back up happening. There was only more tearing down. On a particularly cold Tuesday morning, Mrs. Blackwood announced that the class would be doing a poetry unit. Emma felt a small spark of hope when she heard this. She had always loved poetry, even more than novels or short stories. Poetry felt like a language that spoke directly to her heart. Maybe this would be her chance to show Mrs. Blackwood that she was not as hopeless as the teacher seemed to think. We will begin by studying poems about self-worth and personal strength, Mrs. Blackwood said as she handed out a packet of poems to each student. These poems explore what it means to value yourself and have confidence in your abilities. Emma looked down at the packet and saw poems by famous writers like Maya Angelou, Langston Hughes, and Robert Frost. Her heart lifted slightly as she read the titles. These were exactly the kinds of poems she enjoyed reading. For tomorrow's class, Mrs. Blackwood continued, I want each of you to choose one poem from this packet and be prepared to read it aloud to the class. After you read, you will explain what the poem means to you personally and how it relates to your own life. Emma spent that evening reading through all the poems in the packet. She found herself drawn to a poem by Maya Angelou called Phenomenal Woman. The poem was about a woman who felt confident and strong, despite what other people might think about her appearance or abilities. The words spoke to Emma deeply, reminding her of how she used to feel about herself before Mrs. Blackwood entered her life. Emma practiced reading the poem aloud in her bedroom, trying different ways to emphasize certain lines. She thought about what the poem meant to her and how she could explain its message to the class. For the first time in months, Emma felt excited about an English assignment. The next day, Mrs. Blackwood called on students randomly to read their chosen poems. Emma watched nervously as her classmates took turns reading. Most of them did well, and Mrs. Blackwood offered gentle feedback and encouragement. When it was Jake's turn, he read a poem by Robert Frost about taking the road less traveled. His reading was choppy and he mispronounced several words, but Mrs. Blackwood smiled when he finished. "Very nice, Jake," she said. "I can see that you connected with the poet's message about being brave enough to make your own choices in life." When Sarah read her poem about overcoming challenges, she forgot several lines and had to start over twice. But Mrs. Blackwood nodded approvingly and said, "Good effort, Sarah. It's clear that you understand the importance of perseverance." Emma began to feel hopeful. Maybe Mrs. Blackwood would finally see that Emma could understand poetry and express meaningful ideas about it. "Miss Martinez," Mrs. Blackwood said, turning to look directly at Emma. "You're next." Emma stood up slowly, holding her copy of Phenomenal Woman. Her hands were shaking slightly, but she felt ready. She had practiced this poem so many times that she almost knew it by heart. "I chose Phenomenal Woman by Maya Angelou," Emma said, her voice stronger than it had been in weeks. She began to read the poem, putting feeling and emphasis into each line. The poem talked about a woman who walked with confidence, who knew her own worth, who did not let other people's opinions define her. As Emma read, she felt some of her old strength returning. The words reminded her of who she used to be and who she could be again. When Emma finished reading, she looked up at Mrs. Blackwood, expecting to see some sign of approval, or at least neutrality. Instead, she saw something that made her stomach drop. Mrs. Blackwood was looking at her with what could only be described as disgust. "Miss Martinez," Mrs. Blackwood said, her voice dripping with sarcasm, "please tell the class why you chose this particular poem." Emma took a deep breath. "I chose it because it's about having confidence in yourself, even when other people try to make you feel small." The speaker in the poem knows that she has value and worth even if others don't see it right away. Mrs. Blackwood's expression grew even more disapproving. "I see. And you believe this poem relates to your own life in some way?" "Yes," Emma said quietly. "I think everyone should try to feel confident about who they are." Mrs. Blackwood let out a small laugh that made Emma's blood run cold. "Miss Martinez, I find it quite ironic that you would choose a poem about confidence and self-worth. Your delivery of this poem clearly shows that you have no understanding of what confidence actually looks like." Emma felt like she had been slapped. The classroom became completely silent. "Furthermore," Mrs. Blackwood continued, "it seems almost comical for someone who consistently produces substandard work to stand before us and recite words about being phenomenal. Perhaps you should have chosen a poem that was more realistic about your actual abilities." Emma felt her face burning with shame and anger. She could not believe what Mrs. Blackwood was saying. The teacher was not just criticizing her academic work now. She was attacking Emma as a person. "The irony is quite thick, isn't it, class?" Mrs. Blackwood said, addressing the other students while still staring at Emma. "Here we have a student whose work consistently lacks insight and originality, whose participation in class discussions is minimal at best, and whose overall performance suggests a lack of intellectual curiosity. Yet she chooses to read a poem about being exceptional and confident." Some students in the class looked down at their desks uncomfortably. Others stared at Emma with a mixture of sympathy and relief that they were not the target of Mrs. Blackwood's cruelty. "Perhaps, Miss Martinez," Mrs. Blackwood continued, "you should consider choosing poems that reflect a more accurate understanding of your place in this classroom. There are many fine poems about humility and the importance of recognizing one's limitations." Emma stood frozen at the front of the classroom, still holding the poem in her shaking hands. She felt like everyone was staring at her, judging her, agreeing with Mrs. Blackwood's harsh assessment. The words of Maya Angelou's poem, which had made her feel strong just moments before, now seemed to mock her. "You may sit down now," Mrs. Blackwood said dismissively. Emma walked back to her desk on unsteady legs. She felt dizzy and nauseous. The rest of the class period passed in a blur of other students reading their poems and receiving encouraging comments from Mrs. Blackwood. Emma heard none of it. She was too busy trying not to cry and wondering how she could have been so stupid to think that Mrs. Blackwood would treat her fairly, just because she loved poetry. When the bell rang, Emma packed her things as quickly as possible and rushed out of the classroom. She walked quickly down the hallway, not caring where she was going. She just needed to get away from Mrs. Blackwood and the classroom where she had been humiliated once again. Emma found herself in the girls' bathroom on the first floor. She locked herself in a stall and finally let the tears fall. She cried quietly, trying not to make noise in case other students came in. The tears felt hot on her cheeks, and her whole body shook with the effort of keeping her sobs quiet. Emma thought about the poem she had just read, and how foolish she must have looked, standing there talking about confidence and self-worth. Mrs. Blackwood was right. How could someone like Emma, someone who was clearly a failure as a student, presume to read words about being phenomenal? For the first time, Emma began to wonder if there was something seriously wrong with her. Maybe she had some kind of learning disability that no one had noticed before. Maybe she was not as intelligent as her previous teachers had thought. Maybe Mrs. Blackwood was the first teacher honest enough to tell her the truth about her abilities. Emma stayed in the bathroom stall until the next period started and the hallways became quiet. Then she walked slowly to her next class, feeling like a completely different person than she had been an hour before. The small spark of hope and confidence she had felt while preparing for the poetry assignment was completely gone, replaced by a deep sense of shame and self-doubt. That evening, Emma sat in her bedroom staring at the Maya Angelou poem. The words that had inspired her the night before now seemed to taunt her. Phenomenal woman, what a joke. Emma felt like the least phenomenal person in the world. She thought about Mrs. Blackwood's words, playing them over and over in her mind. Substandard work, lacks insight and originality, minimal participation, lack of intellectual curiosity. Each phrase felt like a knife, cutting deeper into her self-esteem. Emma began to believe that Mrs. Blackwood was not being cruel, she was being honest. Emma was clearly not as smart or talented as she had thought. All those years of good grades and praise from teachers had been lies or mistakes. Mrs. Blackwood was showing Emma who she really was, and it was painful but necessary. Emma looked at herself in the mirror above her dresser. Marcus Thompson had always been the kind of student who noticed things that others missed. He sat 3 seats behind Emma in Mrs. Blackwood's English class, and from the very first week of school, he had been watching what was happening to her with growing concern and anger. Marcus was 17 years old, tall and thin with curly brown hair and glasses. He was not the most popular student in school, but he was well liked by his teachers and had a small group of close friends. Marcus loved writing and kept a detailed journal where he recorded his thoughts about everything from school to books to the people around him. At first, Marcus had written about Mrs. Blackwood's teaching style in general terms. He noted that she was strict and demanding, which he did not mind. Marcus actually liked teachers who challenged their students and had high expectations. But as the weeks went by, he began to notice that Mrs. Blackwood's behavior toward Emma was different from how she treated everyone else. Marcus started keeping track of specific incidents in his journal. He wrote down the dates and details of each time Mrs. Blackwood singled Emma out for criticism. He recorded the unfair grades Emma received compared to other students' work. He noted how Mrs. Blackwood interrupted Emma when she tried to participate in class discussions, but allowed other students to speak without interference. By November, Marcus had filled several pages of his journal with observations about what he had come to recognize as systematic bullying. He had never seen a teacher treat a student this way before, and it made him feel sick to his stomach. Marcus found himself getting angry every time he watched Mrs. Blackwood humiliate Emma in front of the class. The day Emma read the Maya Angelou poem was a turning point for Marcus. He watched in horror as Mrs. Blackwood tore apart Emma's presentation and attacked her personally. Marcus could see Emma's hands shaking as she stood at the front of the room, and he noticed the tears in her eyes as she returned to her seat. That night, Marcus wrote in his journal with more emotion than usual. What happened to Emma today was not teaching, it was cruelty. Mrs. Blackwood destroyed her confidence in front of 30 people for no reason except her own twisted pleasure. Emma's reading was actually beautiful, and her explanation of the poem showed real understanding. But Mrs. Blackwood twisted everything to make Emma feel worthless. This has to stop. Marcus began to pay even closer attention to Emma's behavior outside of English class. He noticed that she had stopped eating lunch with her friends and now sat alone at a table in the corner of the cafeteria. She looked tired and sad all the time. She no longer participated in any of her other classes, even though Marcus knew from talking to mutual friends that she used to be an active and engaged student. Marcus had tried to talk to Emma a few times before, but she was so shy and withdrawn that their conversations had been brief and awkward. He sat near her in study hall and had attempted to ask her about homework assignments or make casual conversation, but Emma always gave short answers and avoided eye contact. But after the poetry incident, Marcus felt like he had to do something. He could not just sit by and watch Mrs. Blackwood destroy another person. He decided to try to approach Emma again, but this time he would be more direct about what he had observed. The opportunity came on a rainy Thursday afternoon in late November. Marcus was in the school library working on a research project when he saw Emma sitting alone at a table in the far corner. She had her head down and appeared to be crying quietly while staring at an open textbook. Marcus gathered his courage and walked over to her table. "Emma," he said softly, "are you okay?" Emma looked up quickly and wiped her eyes with her sleeve. "I'm fine," she said, but her voice was shaky and her eyes were red from crying. Marcus sat down in the chair across from her without being invited. He knew this was bold, but he felt like the situation was too serious for normal social conventions. "I don't think you're fine," Marcus said gently, "and I think I know why." Emma looked at him with surprise and alarm. "What do you mean?" Marcus pulled out his journal and opened it to the pages where he had been documenting Mrs. Blackwood's behavior. "I've been watching what's happening in English class. I've been writing it all down because I couldn't believe what I was seeing." Emma's eyes widened as she looked at Marcus's neat handwriting filling page after page. He had recorded dates, times, specific quotes from Mrs. Blackwood, and descriptions of Emma's reactions. It was like a detailed record of her suffering. "Why would you write about that?" Emma asked quietly. "Because what Mrs. Blackwood is doing to you is not normal," Marcus said. "It's not teaching. It's bullying and it's wrong." Emma shook her head. "You don't understand. Mrs. Blackwood is just trying to help me improve. She's showing me where my work needs to get better." Marcus felt his heart break as he heard Emma defending her tormentor. "Emma, listen to yourself. Do you really believe that? Look at what I wrote down here. These are direct quotes from Mrs. Blackwood. Look at how she talks to you compared to how she talks to everyone else." Marcus flipped through his journal pages, showing Emma specific examples. "On October 15th, you gave a presentation about Emily Dickinson. Mrs. Blackwood interrupted you 6 times with criticism. That same day, Jake gave a presentation about Mark Twain that was half as long and much less detailed, but she didn't interrupt him once. She told him good job when he finished." Emma stared at the journal entries. Seeing her experiences written down in black and white made them seem more real and more serious. "On November 3rd, Marcus continued, Mrs. Blackwood returned your essay about Romeo and Juliet with a grade of C in comments calling your analysis superficial. I read your essay when she passed it back. You left it on your desk for a minute. Emma, your analysis was actually really insightful. You made connections between the play and modern society that none of the rest of us thought of. But somehow you got the worst grade in the class." Emma felt tears starting to form in her eyes again. "But maybe I really am a bad student. Maybe my other teachers were just being nice to me before." Marcus leaned forward across the table. "Emma, you're not a bad student. I've been in school with you since middle school. I remember when you won the writing contest in 8th grade. I remember how excited you used to get about reading assignments. You used to raise your hand all the time and share really interesting ideas." Emma had forgotten about the writing contest. It seemed like something that had happened to a different person in a different lifetime. "Mrs. Blackwood is doing something to you that has nothing to do with your abilities as a student," Marcus continued. "She's targeting you specifically, and I think she's doing it on purpose. This isn't about helping you improve, yet this is about tearing you down." Emma looked at Marcus with confusion and fear. "But why would she do that?" "I never did anything to her." Marcus shook his head. "I don't know why. Maybe she's having problems in her own life and taking it out on you. Maybe you remind her of someone she doesn't like. Maybe she just enjoys having power over someone who won't fight back. But the reason doesn't matter. What matters is that what she's doing is wrong and it needs to stop." Emma felt a mix of relief and terror as she listened to Marcus. Part of her was glad that someone else had noticed what was happening and could confirm that it was not normal. But another part of her was afraid to believe him, If Marcus was right, that meant she had been living through months of abuse for no reason. "What am I supposed to do?" Emma asked. "Mrs. Blackwood is a teacher. No one is going to believe that she's bullying me." Marcus pointed to his journal. "They'll believe it if we have evidence. I've been documenting everything, but I think we need to do more. We need to talk to someone in authority who can help you." Emma shook her head quickly. "No, I can't do that. What if it makes things worse? What if Mrs. Blackwood finds out and gets even meaner to me?" Marcus understood Emma's fear, but he also knew that the situation was already bad and getting worse. "Emma, look at yourself. Really look at yourself. You're crying in the library in the middle of the afternoon. You've stopped eating lunch with your friends. You look like you haven't slept in weeks. How much worse can it get?" Emma realized that Marcus was right. She had been so focused on trying to survive each day in Mrs. Blackwood's class that she had not stepped back to see what the experience was doing to her overall well-being. "I used to love school," Emma said quietly. "I used to love reading and writing. Now I dread coming to English class every day. I feel sick to my stomach every morning when I wake up." "That's not normal," Marcus said firmly. "School should not make you feel that way. English class should not make you feel that way. Mrs. Blackwood has no right to destroy your love of learning." Marcus closed his journal and looked directly at Emma. "I want to help you, but I need you to trust me. Will you let me help you?" Emma felt scared but also hopeful for the first time in months. Someone believed her. Someone had seen what was happening and thought it was wrong. She was not crazy or oversensitive. Mrs. Blackwood really was treating her unfairly. "What do you think we should do?" Emma asked. Marcus smiled for the first time since the conversation had started. "I think we should talk to Ms. Rodriguez, the guidance counselor. She's really nice, and I think she'll listen to us. And I think we should ask my friend Katie to come with us." The meeting with Ms. Rodriguez was scheduled for the following Tuesday during lunch period. Emma had barely slept the night before, her mind racing with worry about what would happen. Marcus had spent the weekend organizing his journal entries and preparing a clear timeline of Mrs. Blackwood's behavior. Katie, who had agreed to join them as a witness, had written down her own observations about the unfair treatment she had witnessed. Ms. Rodriguez was a kind woman in her early 40s who had been working as a guidance counselor at Lincoln High School for 8 years. She had curly black hair, warm brown eyes, and a gentle way of speaking that made students feel comfortable talking to her about their problems. Her office was decorated with inspirational posters and plants, creating a safe and welcoming atmosphere. When Emma, Marcus, and Katie knocked on her office door, Ms. Rodriguez welcomed them with a smile. Come in," she said. "Please have a seat wherever you're comfortable." Emma chose the chair closest to the door, still feeling nervous about the whole situation. Marcus sat next to her holding his journal. Katie took the remaining chair and gave Emma an encouraging nod. "Now then," Ms. Rodriguez said, settling into her desk chair. "Marcus mentioned on the phone that you wanted to discuss some concerns about one of your classes. Why don't you start by telling me what's been going on?" Emma looked at Marcus, feeling too overwhelmed to know where to begin. Marcus opened his journal and cleared his throat. "Ms. Rodriguez, we're here because we believe Mrs. Blackwood has been bullying Emma in English class," Marcus said clearly. "I've been documenting specific incidents for the past 3 months, and what I've observed is a pattern of psychological abuse." Ms. Rodriguez's eyebrows rose slightly, but she maintained her calm, professional demeanor. "Those are serious allegations, Marcus. Can you give me some specific examples of what you've observed?" Marcus began reading from his journal, starting with the first day Mrs. Blackwood had humiliated Emma in front of the class. He described each incident in detail, including dates, exact quotes when he could remember them, and Emma's visible reactions. Ms. Rodriguez listened carefully, taking notes on a yellow legal pad. As Marcus read, Emma felt her face burning with shame all over again. Hearing someone else describe what had happened to her made it feel more real and more serious, but it also made her realize just how much she had endured over the past few months. When Marcus finished reading his documented incidents, Ms. Rodriguez turned to Katie. "Katie, Marcus mentioned that you've also witnessed some of these interactions. Can you tell me what you've observed?" Katie nodded nervously. "Yes, ma'am. I sit 2 seats away from Emma in English class, so I've seen everything Marcus described. Mrs. Blackwood definitely treats Emma differently than she treats the rest of us. She interrupts Emma when she tries to talk, but she never interrupts other students. She gives Emma much harsher criticism than anyone else gets, even when Emma's work is good. Katie paused and looked at Emma with sympathy. The worst part is how Mrs. Blackwood says things to Emma. Her voice gets really cold and mean when she talks to her. It's like she wants to hurt Emma's feelings on purpose. Ms. Rodriguez turned to Emma, who had been sitting quietly throughout the discussion. Emma, I'd like to hear from you directly. How has this situation been affecting you? Emma felt her throat tighten. She had kept her feelings bottled up for so long that she did not know how to express them. I don't know where to start, she whispered. Take your time, Ms. Rodriguez said gently. Just tell me how you've been feeling. Emma took a shaky breath. I used to love English class. I used to love reading and writing. But now I dread going to class every day. I feel sick to my stomach every morning when I wake up because I know I have to face Mrs. Blackwood. As Emma spoke, the words began flowing more freely. She makes me feel stupid and worthless. No matter how hard I try, nothing I do is ever good enough for her. She criticizes everything I say and everything I write. She embarrasses me in front of the whole class almost every day. Emma felt tears starting to fall, but she continued talking. I've started to believe that maybe I really am a bad student. Maybe all my other teachers were just being nice to me, and Mrs. Blackwood is the first one to tell me the truth about how dumb I am. Ms. Rodriguez leaned forward with concern. Emma, you are not dumb. I've looked at your academic record before this meeting, and you've been an excellent student throughout your time here. You've consistently earned A's and B's in all your classes, including English classes with other teachers. Emma looked up in surprise. She had forgotten that Ms. Rodriguez would have access to her grades from previous years. What Mrs. Blackwood is doing to you is not about your abilities as a student, Ms. Rodriguez continued. From what Marcus and Katie have described, this appears to be a case of targeted harassment by a teacher against a student. This is completely unacceptable and against school policy. Ms. Rodriguez set down her pen and looked at all three students seriously. I want you to know that you did the right thing by coming to me with this information. This kind of behavior cannot be tolerated in our school, regardless of who is doing it. Emma felt a wave of relief wash over her. Ms. Rodriguez believed them. She was taking their concerns seriously and treating the situation as the serious problem it was. What happens now? Marcus asked. Ms. Rodriguez consulted her notes. I'm going to begin a formal investigation immediately. I'll need to interview other students in your English class to see if they can corroborate what you've told me. I'll also need to review Emma's grades and assignments from Mrs. Blackwood's class compared to her work in other classes. She turned to Emma. I'll also need to speak with your parents about this situation. They have a right to know what's been happening, and they may want to be involved in the resolution process. Emma felt nervous about involving her parents, but she also felt relieved. She was tired of carrying this burden alone. In the meantime, Ms. Rodriguez continued, I'm going to contact the principal and inform him about these allegations. Mr. Davis will want to be involved in the investigation from the beginning. Ms. Rodriguez spent the next hour interviewing each student separately to get more detailed accounts of what they had witnessed. When she spoke with Emma alone, she asked gentle but probing questions about how the situation had affected Emma's mental health, her other classes, and her home life. Emma, have you been having trouble sleeping or eating? Ms. Rodriguez asked. Emma nodded. I can't fall asleep at night because I keep thinking about what Mrs. Blackwood might do to me the next day. And I don't eat lunch anymore because my stomach always feels upset. Ms. Rodriguez made more notes. Have you had any thoughts about hurting yourself or not wanting to be alive? Emma shook her head quickly. No, nothing like that. I just feel really sad and tired all the time. Ms. Rodriguez looked relieved. I'm glad to hear that. But I want you to know that if you ever do have those kinds of thoughts, you should come to me or another trusted adult immediately. What you've been going through is very stressful, and it's important that we monitor how it's affecting your overall well-being. After the individual interviews were complete, Ms. Rodriguez called Emma's parents and asked them to come to the school for a meeting the next day. She explained that there were some concerns about Emma's experience in one of her classes that needed to be discussed. That evening, Emma sat down with her parents and told them everything that had been happening with Mrs. Blackwood. Maria and Carlos were shocked and angry when they heard about the months of psychological abuse their daughter had endured. Why didn't you tell us about this sooner, mija? Maria asked, tears in her eyes. Emma looked down at her hands. I was ashamed. I thought maybe Mrs. Blackwood was right about me, and I didn't want you to be disappointed. Carlos put his arm around Emma's shoulders. Emma, we could never be disappointed in you for being bullied by a teacher. This is not your fault. Adults are supposed to protect children, not tear them down. The next day, Emma's parents met with Ms. Rodriguez and Principal Davis. Ms. Rodriguez had already begun interviewing other students from Emma's English class, and the picture that emerged was consistent with what Marcus and Katie had reported. Several students confirmed that they had noticed Mrs. Blackwood's unfair treatment of Emma. One student, Sarah, admitted that she had felt uncomfortable watching Mrs. Blackwood humiliate Emma, but had been too afraid to speak up. I felt bad for Emma, but I was scared that if I said something, Mrs. Blackwood would start picking on me too, Sarah told Ms. Rodriguez. Another student, Jake, revealed something even more disturbing. Mrs. Blackwood made some weird comments about Emma when Emma wasn't in class one day. She said something about how some students think they're smarter than they really are and need to be brought down to earth. Principal Davis reviewed Emma's grades from Mrs. Blackwood's class compared to her grades in other subjects. The difference was stark. While Emma was earning A's and B's in all her other classes, she had never received anything higher than a C from Mrs. Blackwood, despite the quality of work that Marcus and Katie had observed. This pattern is very concerning, Principal Davis told Emma's parents. We're going to need to review all of Mrs. Blackwood's grading practices and her interactions with students more carefully. Principal Davis decided that the evidence against Mrs. Blackwood was serious enough to warrant an immediate meeting. On Thursday morning, he called Mrs. Blackwood to his office, informing her only that there were some concerns about her classroom management that needed to be discussed. He did not want to give her time to prepare a defense or potentially destroy any evidence. Mrs. Blackwood arrived at the principal's office at 10:30 a.m. during her free period. She walked in with her usual confident stride, wearing a dark gray suit and carrying herself like someone who had never been questioned about her professional conduct. She had been teaching for 22 years and considered herself one of the most respected educators at Lincoln High School. "Good morning, Mr. Davis," she said, as she took a seat across from his desk. "You mentioned some concerns about my classroom management." Principal Davis was a fair but firm man in his 50s who had been leading Lincoln High School for 6 years. He believed in giving teachers the benefit of the doubt, but he also took student welfare very seriously. He had spent the previous evening reviewing all the evidence Ms. Rodriguez had gathered, and what he had seen disturbed him deeply. "Mrs. Blackwood, I've received some serious allegations about your treatment of students in your English classes," Principal Davis said directly. "Specifically, there are concerns that you have been engaging in inappropriate and harmful behavior toward a student named Emma Martinez." Mrs. Blackwood's expression did not change, but Principal Davis noticed a slight tightening around her eyes. "I'm not sure what you mean by inappropriate behavior, Mr. Davis. I maintain high standards for all my students. If Emma is struggling to meet those standards, perhaps the issue lies with her effort and ability rather than my teaching methods." Principal Davis opened a folder containing Marcus's journal entries, witness statements, and other documentation. "Mrs. Blackwood, I have detailed accounts from multiple students describing a pattern of behavior that goes far beyond maintaining high standards. These accounts describe public humiliation, unfair grading, and what appears to be targeted harassment." He began reading specific examples from Marcus's journal. As he read, Mrs. Blackwood's face remained impassive, but her hands clasped tighter in her lap. "On September 15th, you allegedly made Emma stand in front of the class while you criticized her essay, calling it pedestrian and suggesting it showed a lack of intelligence," Principal Davis read. "On October 20th, you interrupted Emma's presentation 6 times with criticism, while allowing other students to present without interruption." Mrs. Blackwood listened to each example with growing irritation. When Principal Davis finished reading, she responded with cold professionalism. "Mr. Davis, I find it interesting that you're taking the word of students over a teacher with more than 2 decades of experience. Emma Martinez is a struggling student who produces mediocre work. If she feels criticized, perhaps it's because her work deserves criticism. I will not lower my standards to protect students' feelings." "Mrs. Blackwood," Principal Davis said firmly, "we've reviewed Emma's grades in all her other classes. She's earning A's and B's across the board. The only class where she's struggling is yours. How do you explain that discrepancy?" Mrs. Blackwood's composure began to crack slightly. "Other teachers may be too lenient, English requires critical thinking skills that not all students possess. Just because Emma can memorize facts for a history test doesn't mean she can analyze literature with any depth. Principal Davis pulled out examples of Emma's work from other English teachers in previous years. These are essays and assignments Emma completed for other English teachers. They received high grades and positive feedback. Her previous English teacher, Mrs. Patterson, specifically noted Emma's exceptional insight and mature writing style. Mrs. Blackwood glanced at the papers but dismissed them with a wave of her hand. Mrs. Patterson has always been too easy on students. She doesn't prepare them for the real challenges of advanced literature courses. Mrs. Blackwood, Principal Davis continued, I also have witness statements from other students in your class. They describe seeing you treat Emma differently than other students. They report that you use a different tone of voice when speaking to her, and that you provide harsh criticism that seems personal rather than constructive. Mrs. Blackwood stood up abruptly, her calm facade beginning to crumble. Are you seriously going to base a professional evaluation on the gossip of teenagers? Students will say anything to avoid accountability for their own shortcomings. Principal Davis remained seated, his voice steady. Mrs. Blackwood, please sit down. We're not finished with this discussion. Reluctantly, Mrs. Blackwood returned to her chair, but her posture was tense and defensive. I've also discovered that this is not the first complaint about your treatment of students, Principal Davis continued. 3 years ago, there was a similar allegation that was not properly investigated. Can you tell me about that situation? Mrs. Blackwood's face flushed with anger. That was a completely different situation. The student in question was lazy and entitled, and her parents couldn't accept that their precious daughter wasn't as brilliant as they thought. The complaint was dismissed because it was baseless. The complaint was dismissed without a proper investigation, Principal Davis corrected. That was a failure on our part, and I intend to make sure it doesn't happen again. Mrs. Blackwood leaned forward in her chair, her voice becoming sharper. Mr. Davis, I have devoted my entire career to education. I have pushed thousands of students to achieve their potential. If a few weak students can't handle honest feedback about their limitations, that's not my problem. Principal Davis felt his patience wearing thin. Mrs. Blackwood, honest feedback does not involve publicly humiliating students or making them feel worthless. What you've been doing to Emma goes far beyond academic criticism. What I've been doing, Mrs. Blackwood said, her voice rising, is trying to prepare that girl for the real world. Life is not going to coddle her the way her previous teachers have. Someone needs to show her that mediocrity is not acceptable. By destroying her self-confidence and making her dread coming to school? Principal Davis asked. Mrs. Blackwood stood up again, this time with fury in her eyes. That girl reminds me of myself at that age. Quiet, thinking she's smarter than everyone else, expecting praise for average work. I wish someone had been honest with me about my limitations. Instead of filling my head with false confidence, Principal Davis realized that Mrs. Blackwood had just revealed the real motivation behind her treatment of Emma. This was not about education or high standards. This was personal. Mrs. Blackwood, are you telling me that you've been targeting Emma because she reminds you of yourself? Principal Davis asked, his voice filled with disbelief. Mrs. Blackwood realized she had said too much, but the anger and resentment she had been carrying for years came pouring out. Students like Emma think they're special because they read books and write little stories. They think the world owes them something just because they have good grades in elementary school. I learned the hard way that intelligence doesn't guarantee success, and maybe it's time she learned that lesson too. Principal Davis was horrified. Mrs. Blackwood, you've just admitted to deliberately targeting a student based on your own personal issues. That is completely unacceptable and unprofessional. Mrs. Blackwood's face was red with fury now. She had spent years building walls around her bitterness, and now those walls were crumbling. Do you know what it's like to be told you're gifted your whole childhood, only to discover that the world doesn't care about your potential? Do you know what it's like to watch less intelligent people succeed while you struggle to make ends meet? As a high school teacher, that doesn't give you the right to take out your frustrations on innocent students, Principal Davis said firmly. Innocent? Mrs. Blackwood laughed bitterly. Emma sits there with her quiet superiority, thinking she's better than everyone else because she reads poetry. Just like I used to be. Someone needs to show her that being smart doesn't make you special. Principal Davis stood up from his desk. Mrs. Blackwood, you are describing psychological abuse of a minor. You have deliberately set out to damage a student's self-esteem and academic confidence based on your own personal resentments. This is grounds for immediate termination. Mrs. Blackwood seemed to realize suddenly what she had admitted. She tried to backtrack, but it was too late. I never said I was trying to damage anyone. I was just trying to prepare her for reality. By humiliating her in front of her peers, by giving her unfair grades, by making her feel worthless. Principal Davis's voice was filled with anger now. Mrs. Blackwood, you have violated every principle of ethical teaching. You have used your position of authority to harm a vulnerable student. Mrs. Blackwood's mask of professionalism completely fell away. That girl has everything handed to her. Supportive parents, natural intelligence, opportunities I never had. A little criticism isn't going to kill her. Maybe it will teach her some humility. A little criticism? Principal Davis repeated. Mrs. Blackwood, Emma has been coming to school every day in fear. She stopped eating lunch. She's lost her love of reading and writing. She's begun to doubt her own intelligence and worth as a person. Emma was sitting in her chemistry class when the office assistant knocked on the door and handed her teacher a note. Emma Martinez, please report to the guidance office, Mrs. Chen read aloud. Emma's heart immediately started racing. She wondered if something had gone wrong with the investigation, or if Mrs. Blackwood had found out about the complaint and was angry with her. Emma gathered her books with shaking hands and walked slowly to Ms. Rodriguez's office. When Emma arrived, she found Ms. Rodriguez waiting with a gentle smile. Emma's parents were also there, which surprised her. They both stood up when she entered the room. Emma, please sit down, Ms. Rodriguez said warmly. We have some important news to share with you. Emma sat down carefully, still feeling nervous about what she was about to hear. Emma, Principal Davis said, entering the room behind her, I want you to know that Mrs. Blackwood has been suspended from her position effective immediately. She will not be returning to Lincoln High School. Emma stared at Principal Davis in shock. She had hoped that the investigation might lead to some changes, but she had never imagined that Mrs. Blackwood would actually be removed from her job. What happened? Emma asked quietly. Ms. Rodriguez explained the meeting with Mrs. Blackwood and how the teacher had admitted to deliberately targeting Emma because of her own personal issues. Emma listened in amazement as she learned that Mrs. Blackwood's treatment of her had nothing to do with her abilities as a student and everything to do with the teacher's own bitterness and resentment. Mrs. Blackwood admitted that she saw herself in you when she was younger, Ms. Rodriguez explained. She had been told she was gifted as a child, but she felt that life had disappointed her. Instead of dealing with her own issues in a healthy way, she took out her frustrations on you. Emma felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. Relief that she was not actually a bad student, but sadness that an adult she had trusted had deliberately tried to hurt her. Does this mean I was never really failing English? Emma asked. Principal Davis shook his head firmly. Emma, you were never failing anything. Mrs. Blackwood was giving you unfair grades and providing destructive criticism that had nothing to do with the quality of your work. We've arranged for a different English teacher to review all of your assignments from this semester and provide fair grades based on academic merit alone. Emma's mother reached over and squeezed her hand. Mia, we're so proud of you for speaking up about this situation. It took a lot of courage to come forward. Emma looked at her parents with tears in her eyes. I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner. I thought maybe Mrs. Blackwood was right about me and I didn't want to disappoint you. Carlos put his arm around Emma's shoulders. Emma, you could never disappoint us. You're our daughter, and we love you no matter what. We're just sorry that you had to go through this alone for so long. Ms. Rodriguez leaned forward in her chair. Emma, I want you to understand that what happened to you was not your fault. Mrs. Blackwood was in a position of authority and she abused that power. You trusted her to help you learn and grow, and she violated that trust. None of this was because of anything you did wrong. Emma nodded, but she still felt confused about how to process everything that had happened. What happens now? She asked. Now we focus on helping you heal and rebuild your confidence, Ms. Rodriguez said. I'd like to arrange for you to meet with our school counselor, Dr. Williams, once a week for the rest of the semester. She specializes in helping students recover from traumatic experiences. Emma felt nervous about the idea of counseling, but she also felt ready to get help. She was tired of feeling sad and worthless all the time. We've also arranged for you to complete this semester's English requirements with Mr. Johnson, Principal Davis said. He's an excellent teacher who will provide you with the supportive, encouraging environment you deserve. Over the following weeks, Emma began the slow process of healing from the psychological damage Mrs. Blackwood had inflicted. Dr. Williams helped Emma understand that the negative thoughts she had developed about herself were not based in reality but were the result of sustained emotional abuse. Emma, when someone in authority repeatedly tells you that you're not good enough, your brain starts to believe it. Dr. Williams explained during one of their sessions, it's going to take time and effort to replace those negative thoughts with positive, realistic ones. Emma also began working with Mr. Johnson in English class. Mr. Johnson was a kind, patient teacher who had heard about Emma's situation from Principal Davis. He was careful to provide Emma with encouraging feedback, while still challenging her academically. The first time Mr. Johnson handed back one of Emma's essays with a grade of A and positive comments written in the margins, Emma stared at the paper in disbelief. "Emma, this is excellent work," Mr. Johnson said after class. "Your analysis of the symbolism in this novel shows real insight and maturity. You should be proud of yourself." Emma felt tears in her eyes, but for the first time in months they were tears of relief rather than sadness. "Thank you," she whispered. Marcus had also become a closer friend to Emma throughout this process. He continued to check in with her regularly and celebrate each small step in her recovery. "I saw you raise your hand in history class yesterday," Marcus said one day at lunch. "That was awesome to see." Emma smiled. "Dr. Williams has been helping me remember that my ideas are worth sharing. It's still scary, but I'm trying to be brave." Katie had also become part of Emma's support system. The three of them started eating lunch together regularly, and Katie often reminded Emma of her strengths when she was having difficult days. One of the most important parts of Emma's healing process was reconnecting with her love of reading and writing. Dr. Williams encouraged Emma to start journaling about her experiences and feelings. At first, writing felt painful because it reminded Emma of Mrs. Blackwood's harsh criticism. But gradually, Emma began to remember why she had fallen in love with words in the first place. Emma also started reading for pleasure again. She began with shorter books and poems that felt comfortable and safe. Slowly, she worked her way back to the kinds of novels and literature that had once brought her so much joy. 3 months after Mrs. Blackwood's suspension, Emma felt ready to take on a bigger challenge. The school newspaper was accepting submissions for a special issue about student experiences, and Emma decided to write about what she had gone through. Emma spent weeks working on her essay, writing about the psychological impact of teacher bullying and the importance of speaking up when adults abuse their power. She wrote about the damage that Mrs. Blackwood had done to her self-esteem and the long process of rebuilding her confidence. But Emma also wrote about the people who had helped her. Marcus, who had noticed her suffering and refused to stay silent. Katie, who had supported her when she needed allies. Ms. Rodriguez and Principal Davis, who had taken her concerns seriously and acted to protect her. And her parents, who had loved and supported her unconditionally. "No student should have to endure what I went through," Emma wrote in her essay. "But I also learned that there are always people willing to help if you have the courage to ask for it. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is admit that you need support." When Emma's essay was published in the school newspaper, it created a powerful impact throughout Lincoln High School. Other students who had experienced similar treatment from teachers came forward to share their own stories. The article also sparked important conversations about the power dynamics between teachers and students and the responsibility of schools to protect vulnerable young people. Emma received dozens of messages from students thanking her for her courage in speaking out. Several teachers also reached out to express their support and to assure Emma that Mrs. Blackwood's behavior was not representative of the teaching profession as a whole. One of the most meaningful responses came from Mrs. Patterson, Emma's English teacher from the previous year. "Emma, I always knew you had exceptional talent as a writer," she wrote in a letter. "I'm so sorry that someone tried to convince you otherwise, but I'm proud of you for finding your voice again." By the end of the school year, Emma had not only recovered academically but had grown stronger as a person. Her grades had returned to their previous high levels, and she had rediscovered her passion for learning. She had also developed better skills for advocating for herself and recognizing when situations were unhealthy. Emma started a peer support group at Lincoln High School for students who had experienced difficult relationships with teachers or other authority figures. The group met once a week and provided a safe space for students to share their experiences and support each other. Marcus became the co-leader of the support group, and together he and Emma helped other students recognize the signs of psychological abuse and find the courage to speak up when they needed help. As Emma prepared to enter her senior year, she reflected on how much she had grown through this painful experience. She had learned that she was stronger than she had realized and that her voice mattered. She had also learned the importance of having allies and advocates who were willing to stand up for what was right. Emma's love of reading and writing had returned stronger than ever.